I'm 104 years old, and sweet potatoes are not a side dish. They are one of the most misunderstood, most underestimated sources of sustained human energy that exists in the natural world, and almost nobody eating them today understands why they actually work. Most people think they eat sweet potatoes because they're healthy. They've heard the word antioxidants. They've seen them on some list of superfoods. They pick them up at the grocery store, boil them or microwave them, eat them alongside something else, and move on. They have no idea what they just consumed. They have no idea what's happening inside their body in the hours that follow. And they especially have no idea why some people eat them and feel nothing, while others eat them and feel like their entire afternoon changed. The difference is not luck. The difference is understanding. Let me start where most explanations stop. Sweet potatoes contain carbohydrates, yes. But the conversation about carbohydrates in this culture has been so distorted, so oversimplified, that people have lost the ability to think clearly about them. We've been told carbohydrates spike blood sugar. We've been told they cause crashes. We've been told to fear them, restrict them, replace them. And for certain carbohydrates, that fear is justified. But sweet potatoes operate by a completely different mechanism. And until you understand that mechanism, you cannot understand why they produce the effect they do. The key is not what's in sweet potatoes. The key is the rate at which what's in them enters your bloodstream. Sweet potatoes have a glycemic index that sits significantly lower than white potatoes, white rice, white bread, or most of the processed foods people eat daily. What that means in practice is that the glucose derived from a sweet potato enters the bloodstream gradually, not in a flood, not in a spike that demands an emergency insulin response. Gradually, in a measured, sustained release that keeps blood sugar stable for hours. And blood sugar stability is not just about avoiding diabetes. Blood sugar stability is the foundation of mental clarity, emotional evenness, and physical endurance throughout the day. When your blood sugar is stable, your brain is a consistent supply of fuel. When it spikes and crashes, your brain is running on fumes between the peaks. But it goes even deeper than that. The reason sweet potatoes release glucose slowly is not simply because of their sugar content, it's because of their fiber architecture. A medium sweet potato contains several grams of both soluble and insoluble fiber, and those two types of fiber do different things in your digestive system. The soluble fiber forms a gel-like substance in the intestine that physically slows the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. It acts like a governor on an engine, not stopping the fuel from flowing, but regulating how fast it flows. The insoluble fiber feeds the bacteria in your gut, which matters more than most people realize, because those bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids that have systemic anti-inflammatory effects throughout the body. So when you eat a sweet potato, you're not just eating carbohydrates. You're consuming a delivery system that regulates its own release. That is what no processed food, no matter how it's marketed, can replicate. And here's what most people miss entirely. Cooking method changes everything. A sweet potato that has been slowly baked has a higher glycemic index than a sweet potato that has been boiled and then cooled. The heat from baking breaks down the resistant starch into simpler sugars that absorb more quickly. A boiled and cooled sweet potato actually undergoes retrogradation. The starch molecules rearrange into a more resistant structure that your digestive enzymes cannot break down as easily. That resistant starch passes further into the digestive tract, where it feeds your microbiome rather than spiking your blood sugar. The same food, prepared differently, produces measurably different metabolic effects. This is not a minor point. This is the reason two people can eat sweet potatoes and report completely different experiences. The practical implication is straightforward. If you want steady energy, boil your sweet potatoes and eat them after they've had time to cool, or eat them reheated after they've been refrigerated overnight. The resistant starch formed during cooling does not fully revert when you gently reheat. It remains more intact than freshly cooked starch. This one change in preparation, invisible to the eye, changes what your body does with the food. Now, let's go deeper into what steady energy actually means physiologically, because the phrase gets thrown around without any real understanding of the mechanism. Energy crashes happen when insulin overshoots. You eat something that rapidly elevates blood glucose, your pancreas releases insulin in proportion to that spike. The insulin clears the glucose from your bloodstream efficiently, sometimes too efficiently, and blood sugar drops below the baseline, below the stable range. That drop is what you feel as fatigue, as brain fog, as irritability, as the inexplicable urge to eat again even though you ate an hour ago. The crash is not weakness. It's a chemical event, and it is entirely preventable by controlling how fast glucose enters the blood in the first place. Sweet potatoes, eaten correctly, prevent that overshoot. The glucose rises slowly enough that the insulin response is measured rather than reactive. Your pancreas doesn't need to produce an emergency quantity of insulin. The glucose is cleared gradually, matching the rate at which it arrived. Blood sugar stays within the optimal window. Your brain stays fueled. Your body stays calm. And here's where the deeper principle comes in, one that connects energy to something most people never associate with food. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, rises when blood sugar drops. This is not metaphorical. It is a direct physiological response. When glucose falls below a certain threshold, the body interprets this as a threat and triggers the adrenal system to release cortisol, which in turn signals the liver to release stored glucose to compensate. This is why people who eat unstable diets often feel anxious, wired, or on edge, not because of their circumstances, but because of their blood chemistry. Stable blood sugar is not just about energy. It is a direct input into your stress physiology. People who keep their blood glucose stable throughout the day tend to have lower baseline cortisol. And lower baseline cortisol means better sleep, faster recovery, clearer thinking, and more emotional resilience. Sweet potatoes are not a mood food in any soft or poetic sense. They're a physiological tool for hormonal stability. But the story doesn't end with glucose and cortisol. Let's go one level deeper into what else is happening when you eat sweet potatoes regularly. Sweet potatoes are extraordinarily rich in potassium, more per serving than a banana, which is where most people think potassium comes from. Potassium is the electrolyte that regulates the sodium-potassium pump in every cell membrane in your body. That pump is how cells generate electrical potential. It is how neurons fire. It is how muscle cells contract. When potassium is insufficient, cellular communication becomes inefficient. Muscles fatigue faster. Nerve transmission slows. Cognitive processing becomes sluggish. You feel it not as a sharp pain, but as a dull heaviness, the lack of drive, a sensation that everything is slightly harder than it should be. Regular consumption of potassium-rich foods maintains the electrochemical environment that your cells need to function at their best. This is one of the reasons that people who shift toward whole food diets and include things like sweet potatoes report feeling more physically capable over time, not because of any single dramatic effect, but because the underlying cellular machinery is running more cleanly. Layered on top of this is the beta-carotene content of sweet potatoes, the pigment that gives them their orange color and that your body converts to vitamin A. Vitamin A is not just about vision, which is where the conversation usually stops. Vitamin A is a critical regulator of gene expression. It binds to receptors in the cell nucleus that control which genes get turned on and off. It governs the differentiation of immune cells, the integrity of mucosal barriers in the gut and respiratory tract, and the inflammatory response system. Chronic low-grade vitamin A insufficiency, not deficiency severe enough to cause symptoms you can name, but insufficiency subtle enough to go unnoticed, is associated with impaired immune function, slower wound healing, and dysregulated inflammation. One medium sweet potato provides more than your entire daily requirement of vitamin A in a highly bioavailable form paired with the natural fats of the food. Here's what most people miss about bioavailability. Beta-carotene is fat-soluble, meaning it requires fat to be absorbed. Eating a plain sweet potato with nothing else reduces how much of that beta-carotene your body actually captures. Adding a small amount of fat, a drizzle of olive oil, a little butter, even the fat from other foods in the same meal, dramatically increases absorption. The food itself is only part of the equation. How you eat it determines how much you actually receive from it. This principle applies across the entire nutritional profile of sweet potatoes. They contain B vitamins, including B6, which is a cofactor in the production of serotonin and dopamine. They contain manganese, which activates enzymes involved in energy metabolism and bone formation. They contain copper, which supports iron absorption and connective tissue maintenance. None of these nutrients function in isolation. They are part of an interconnected system where each element supports the utilization of others. This is why isolated supplements rarely produce the same effects as whole foods. You're not just missing the compound, you're missing the matrix it comes in. And this connects to the deepest principle of all, which is that the body is not looking for isolated inputs. It is looking for coherence. Foods that have evolved alongside human biology over thousands of years carry a kind of nutritional intelligence that processed and isolated substances don't possess. Sweet potatoes are not complicated. They don't require a label with 40 ingredients. Their complexity is biological, not industrial, and that biological complexity is what the body knows how to read. So here is what to actually do with all of this. Eat sweet potatoes boiled, not baked. If steady energy is your primary goal, allow them to cool before eating, or refrigerate them and eat them cold or gently reheated. Eat them with a small amount of fat to maximize beta-carotene absorption. Eat them as a central part of a meal, not a decoration beside something else. If you are eating them for the afternoon, eat them at lunch. The sustained glucose release will carry you through the hours when most people are reaching for caffeine or sugar. Do not peel them if you can avoid it. The skin contains a concentration of fiber, potassium, and antioxidants that you discard when you peel. Scrub them, cook them whole, eat the skin, and eat them consistently, not as an occasional healthy choice, as a regular, intentional practice. The microbiome benefits of resistant starch accumulate over time. The potassium buffering effect is not a one-time event. It requires consistent intake to maintain the electrochemical environment your cells need. The anti-inflammatory cascade from the gut bacteria feeding on fermentable fiber is a chronic, ongoing process that rewards regularity. There's one more layer worth understanding, and it has to do with timing and quantity. A common mistake is eating too large a portion at once in the belief that more is better. The glycemic response to sweet potatoes is dose-dependent. A moderate serving, roughly the size of your fist, delivers the slow-release effect. An oversized portion begins to overwhelm even the moderating effect of the fiber, and produces a more significant glucose rise. More is not always more. The goal is not to maximize intake, but to find the quantity that keeps you in the stable range for the longest period. Equally important is what you pair sweet potatoes with. Protein and fat consumed in the same meal further slow gastric emptying, the rate at which the stomach releases food into the small intestine. When you slow gastric emptying, you extend the absorption window even further. A meal built around sweet potatoes combined with a quality protein source and a natural fat creates a metabolic environment where glucose enters the bloodstream over 3, 4, even 5 hours. That is not a meal. That is a strategy. And it is the difference between people who eat well and people who eat intelligently. 104 years of watching what food does, not to how people look, but to how they function, how they think, how they hold up under pressure, how they age, has made one thing absolutely clear. The foods that sustain people are not the ones with the longest ingredient lists or the most impressive marketing. They are the ones that work with the body's own systems quietly, consistently, and without disruption. Sweet potatoes are one of those foods, not because they're trendy, not because someone told you to eat them, because the biology is real, the mechanism is sound, and the effect, when you understand it and apply it correctly, is something you will feel every single afternoon for the rest of your life.